But good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Nina, thank you for having me, and I apologize that I had to reschedule from, I guess last month there was a mix-up and I had to be in Sacramento that morning. And I also want to extend in for the visitors who moved here from Hawaii. This is such a great club, they invited a Kiwanian to be the program today. So, and there's a really nice Kiwanis club down the street. We would love to have you.
Hey!
No,
Get the hook!
get the hook, get the hook. But what good is having a politician speak if I'm not going to cause trouble? Right? There's no trouble in politics these days, is there? Everybody's on the same page, they're all working together. You know, it's all happening, right? What? What did you say?
We switch it on Saturday.
Switch it around. Anyway, but it's good to be back. This is, I think, the second time I've been able to be the program, and so it's nice to be back to share a little bit about what's going on in the state. And thank you guys for being nice to Arda when she comes. I appreciate it because the staff is an extension of our office, and we're here to serve, and you know, we're all part of the same community. So thank you for that. And I always give a shout out to Arda because she went to CV, and then she went to GCC, and then Rick's not gonna like this, she went to USC after that. So she's a local product. And I live right down the street. I get to chair the Budget Committee on Education, which I asked to do when I got elected to the Senate, because as Dr. Bayard knows, if we don't educate our kids, shame on us, and we have such a challenge ahead of us because California is such a large state, and we have such a large immigrant population of young people who are smart and deserve the opportunity to thrive and excel. And if you go back to post-World War II, and Rick's the only one who was around, well, maybe Zava was around. If you go back to post-World War II, you know, we created the prosperity of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s because we took that World War II generation and we invested in young people who normally would not have gone to college. And so we opened up higher education for a whole generation, and it worked. And so we have the same opportunity in California. And a couple alarming statistics to think about. Again, if you're 65 and older in California, and Zavin's the only one here that signs up for that. If you're 65 and older in California, we're the 4th most educated state in the country. If you're 25 in California, we're the 40th most educated state in the country. And every cohort has gone progressively, compared to other states, less educated. So 55, 45, 35. And that's an unsustainable model for a state that has Silicon Valley, for a state that has so much biotech in San Diego that requires an educated workforce. We can't be 40th and be competitive. So we have to educate our kids. And so for me, that's why I asked to be the budget chair on the education. Now, a second piece of it was when I was in the state assembly, I was there for the Great Recession, where we devastated every service and education, and we had a $30 billion budget shortfall. So it's nice to be there during an economic recovery, to actually be able to use our resources where I think they're necessary. We hear a lot about, one challenge we hear a lot about the local control funding formula for K-12 and how K-12 this year is going to be fully funded, right? I don't know if you've heard that out there, but that's a rhetorical fully funded. They picked an arbitrary number 5 years ago and said, this number means schools will be fully funded. The number wasn't based on adequacy, it wasn't based on what schools should get, it wasn't based on how we compare with other states. They picked a number. And frankly, even though this year they're going to say we're fully funding local control funding and K-12 education, the actual purchasing power of that funding today is less than 2007. So translation, in 2007, K-12 schools had more money to spend based on inflation than they do today. And so it's a nice thing that we're 2 years ahead of schedule meeting this target. It's a little bit of a false narrative because the target was set arbitrarily. So we still have to make sure that our K-12 schools get more funding. Now, there was good news this year for community college in the sense that the governor in his initial budget did very well for community colleges. I'm turning to that page. There we go, hold on one second. So community colleges this year, in the original proposal, so there's a student-focused funding formula that's got $175 million to receive for colleges. There's a whole new funding mechanism, and have you looked at that yet? The governor's proposed? How is GCC gonna do on that?
Well, I have significant concerns that we'll
Absolutely.
discuss with you at a later time.
Translation, GCC hates it.
We appreciate the funding support and the level of support, but the way in which it's being suggested to be sent out and the use and the $100 million of a whole new online education
That's all.
are questions that need some serious look.
Right, and part of it, that's the second piece. So part of it is the governor is changing the way community colleges get funded to actually have 25% of the funding be related to how well they succeed. And so that's causing some consternation in the community colleges because two things. A, if you have a student population that takes more than 2 years, that has challenges, if you base the funding based on success, you might not reach the targets of a more affluent area of the state. Also, there's a concern that community colleges might start arbitrarily finding ways to help people succeed who don't necessarily qualify to succeed. So there's some safeguards that need to be put in that. And then on top of that, the governor is proposing to create a whole new community college just for online learning. And that's probably the most controversial component. His theory is everybody watches late night television and sees all the certificate programs that get advertised constantly. And he's saying, well, the community colleges can offer those programs. Why should we let the for-profit world take those students? We should compete. Community colleges say, well, we have existing online programs, enhance them, don't create a whole new school. And so that's where the rub is going to be. My experience with this governor is he typically, and Yvette's shaking her head too, so she understands this, this governor typically gets what he wants. And so the challenge is going to be how do we rein it in and put enough safeguards to make it work, because I just don't see him losing some of these legacy battles that he wants to create. But overall, community colleges did better than, say, UC and Cal State. The governor has never really loved, even though he went to Cal, he's never really embraced the University of California as he's done the other segments of education. And so that's one of the challenges we have, is that the University of California, which has their own accountability issues, anybody who's reading the paper sees that they've got some issues. Now the challenge with the University of California is they have constitutional autonomy. I don't know if you all know that, but they were set up in the California Constitution with complete autonomy from the legislature. Where we can tell the community colleges what to do, we can tell the Cal State system what to do, we can't tell the University of California what to do, but for whatever controls we put on the budget. But as far as governance goes, they have complete and total autonomy. Yesterday, I'm excited, I should say excited, you all know that mental health is a very important issue to me, and some of you know my older brother passed away, actually jumped off a building and texted me from the roof just before he jumped. This is an interesting story. When I die, my nephew's going to put a baseball bat in the coffin, so when I go, I can beat the crap out of him when I see him. So I've got that worked out. But he literally texted me from the roof, and one of the things that touched me after he passed away was how many people came up to me and shared their own family experience about mental health, about depression, about suicide. And it really is an issue that, you know, people will talk about their cholesterol when they're at a cocktail party, but they don't really talk about mental health, and they don't really talk about those needs. So I try to make that at the forefront of my platform as an elected official. And yesterday we put in a bill, and we haven't even sent it out to the press yet, but it's the student IDs. We're going to require every high school and college to put a suicide prevention hotline number on student IDs. And they're not going to have to reprint them, but as they print them going forward, prospectively, all student IDs will have a suicide prevention hotline number on it. What do you think of that, off the top of your head? You okay with that?
We need the help, yes.
Yeah, so, yeah, and it's easy. And so we put that in yesterday. And somebody said to me, if it prevents one suicide, that's enough. You know, and given this large of the state, I'm sure it's going to do more. Zavin, you have a question?
I think it's a great idea, but the one thing that I would caution is providing the funding for the hotline to be staffed properly.
Yeah, and it's not the school's hotline, it's the actual, the existing suicide hotline numbers that are out there. But you're right, if you don't have the services, and that's often what happens is we discuss things and then we don't fund the underlying services. So no, that's very important. And there's an actual mental health caucus that's been created, and it's bipartisan, because again, these issues are bipartisan. So that's exciting. Many of you know that my #1 initiative is the school start time. Some of you have read about that, and let me give you a little bit about that. It's all based on now 30 years of research on the brain chemistry of teenagers, and as we all know, teenagers are unique. Right? Believe it or not, there's a biological reason why teenagers are unique. There's an actual biological reason why if you put your teenager to bed at 9, they don't fall asleep until 11. Their brain chemistry and the level of melatonin, this is actual scientific fact, the level of melatonin in their brain prevents them from falling asleep before 11 o'clock. And so there's a reason why your teenager is comfortable doing homework at 10:30. Their brain chemistry says that's a good time for them to be doing their homework. Conversely, or in addition to that, the morning deep sleep is the most important sleep for a teen. And teens, for optimum health, require 10 hours of sleep.
Was this study done by a teenager?
So there's an actual reason why your teen is hard to get out of bed. They require 10 hours of sleep a night for optimum health, and on average they get 4.5 to 5. And so we have a whole generation of teenagers who are sleep deprived. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why they're miserable. And based on this 30 years of research, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Centers for Disease Control looked at all the research, and they came up with a recommendation that said high school and middle school should start no earlier than 8:30. Now, we all talk about how European high schools have students that perform well. Well, one of the reasons why is they start later. They start at 9 or 10 o'clock, and it's based on sleep. And so over 400 school districts around the country looked at the research, looked at the recommendation, and moved to a later start. And guess what they found? Test scores go up. Graduation rate goes up. Attendance goes up. What happens when more kids go to school? The school gets more money because it's based on attendance. So graduation rate, test scores, and attendance go up. Guess what goes down? #1 killer of teens in America? Car accidents. Car accidents go down. Guess what else goes down? #2 killer of teens in America? Suicide. The actual incidences and percentage of suicidal thoughts amongst teens in the schools that start later is significantly lower and less frequent than in students who have to go to school at 7:30. Drug use goes down, obesity goes down, sexual promiscuity goes down, marijuana use goes down. The thing that blew me away, sports participation goes up because kids feel better, they participate more. Sports injuries go down because the kids are healthier. You had a question?
You're probably going to speak to this next, but so then if there's all this evidence, what's the holdback by the districts?
That's the best question ever. That's why you're president.
So,
The-
and then I have your other questions to ask here later on.
The $20 is coming. The resistance comes from adults who resist change. So I say, when your kid is sick, do you take them to the pediatrician or do you take them to the school board? You take them to the pediatrician. So the resistance comes from adults who don't want to change. It's a purely made up movement that somehow this should be left to local cities and local schools to decide. Now, why this isn't a local control issue? We as a state have determined that if you use asbestos, it causes cancer, right? So we say you can't use asbestos tiles in your construction because asbestos kills you, right? We have determined that lead paint causes brain damage. So we say you can't use lead paint. Well, sleep depriving our teenagers is killing them. This is a public health issue. It's not a local control issue. And there's 30 years of peer-reviewed, indisputable science backed up by over 400 school districts that have seen consistent, verified, not anecdotal, actual hard data to support it. Now, one might argue, is it going to cost money? Well, the RAND Corporation last year looked at all of the economic implications and actually showed that the California economy would improve by $12.5 billion in the first 10 years, and every dollar a school district invests in Late Start, they get $4 back. So you have science backed up by results ensured by economic data. So, under current law, a local school district can make the change. They have to negotiate it with their collective bargaining units, and what La Cañada did is they were working directly with the Stanford researchers, the same ones I'm working with. They phased it in. So 2 years ago, they went to a Late Start Tuesday just to see how it would work. And everybody went, our kids do better on Tuesday. They're happier on Tuesday. And the teachers went, wow, the kids are more attentive on Tuesday. Oh, and by the way, there's less disruptive activity and less discipline. That's consistent with all the school districts as well. So they went, wow, we should expand this. So this year, they negotiated a 5-day-a-week Late Start. And guess what? The kids are happier. They're healthier. Zero period went from 6:30 to 7:30. Guess what happened? More kids showed up. All the boys who didn't want to get out of bed at 6:30 now go to the band ensemble and the choir practice at 7:30 because they get an extra hour of sleep. So they're surveying their parents, their kids, and their teachers, and the results are overwhelmingly positive, and I believe they're going to make it permanent. Now, why is it hard for school districts to do it independent? Because of the extracurricular activities. That's the only legitimate argument, is you want the extracurricular activities to be coordinated. And frankly, that's why the administrators came to me and said, do it as a statewide, because then everybody's on the same schedule. Yes, ma'am?
So are you proposing this for middle school and high school students?
Teenagers, middle school and high schools. That's where the science is. Elementary school, brain chem, there's a reason why when you think you're up late on a Friday and you want to sleep in on a Saturday and your 6-year-old wakes you up at 6 in the morning, that's based on their brain chemistry. Little kids can get out of bed at 6 o'clock in the morning and be raring to go. And what most school districts do now is they take their high school kids and then they come back and they do their little kids. What most school districts that switch to the Late Start just flip it, because the brain chemistry is different for the little kids. It's the teenage brains that are unique. And so I'm passionate about this because I say to myself, if I asked any of you in a vacuum, do you want test scores to go up and suicide to go down?
Yeah.
Who wouldn't raise their hand? If I ask any of you, do you want attendance to go up and car accidents to go down? Isn't this what we want for our kids? For them to be healthier, happier, and perform better and be safer? By the way, the police chiefs support this because crime goes down. Because when does crime happen? In the morning or in the afternoon? Right? In the afternoon. So now we're going to have one less hour of afternoon idle time. Right? The doctors support this. The only opposition we're getting, or I shouldn't say the most strenuous opposition we're getting, is from the California School Boards Association, because they don't want to be told what to do. And so they have been working vigorously against it. But, yes, Simon?
It's my theory. I have nothing to be substantiated except for Southern theory. I think what they want to do is end the day at 3 o'clock so that they can have the rest of the day free. That's part of
Well, it's the school boards, so they're not really affected by it. One of the arguments that they do make, which is a legitimate question to ask, but actually has an answer, is what is the effect on working families? So here's why that's a good question, but here's why it's not germane. That assumes the theory that there's a perfect start time for every working family, which there's not. If you start at 7:45, you're going to convenience somebody and inconvenience somebody else. If you start at 8:05, you're going to convenience somebody and inconvenience. There's no perfect start time for every working family. That's number one. Number two, children in 2 working family households, children in single family households, children in families that have other challenges are the most sleep deprived children and statistically show the biggest benefit after the change. So even though some families have a struggle to maybe accommodate the later start time, their children actually see the biggest benefit from the extra sleep because they're the most sleep deprived. So the kids we're worried about actually get the biggest benefit. Another interesting piece of it, there have been studies when schools have gone from 8:15 to 8:30, and even the extra 15 minutes of that deep sleep has shown a benefit. That's how important that morning sleep is. And so I'm passionate about it, and frankly, there's nothing to stop the Glendale Unified from making this change. Denise?
Can you talk, is this in committee up in Sacramento, or what's the support from your?
It got through the Senate, it got through the Assembly Policy Committee, and it stalled on the Assembly floor. Because the week of the vote, the California School Boards Association called all of their members to call all of the Assembly members in, and so we struggled on the Assembly floor. So I'm gonna bring it up again this year, but we're about 10 votes short on the Assembly floor. And so we're working with those Assembly members. I believe, I got a call yesterday, the California Medical Association is coming on board as a support, and that's a big piece. The pediatricians have been supportive, American Academy of Pediatrics, but having the entire medical association is a big deal. The teachers are split. So the American Federation of Teachers supports it. The California Teachers Association opposes it. The state PTA, California PTA, is one of my strongest supporters. So they formally support it. And so it's my passion, because how often do you get an opportunity to increase test scores and lower suicide just by changing the clock? And the day shifts. It doesn't get shorter, it just shifts.
That was my question. So basically they get out later?
Right, the day just shifts. And so here's why it doesn't cost any extra money. So let's say your day now, I'm just gonna use round numbers so it makes sense. So let's say your day starts at 3 and you budget 3 hours of after school time, 3 to 6, right? So if your day now shifts to 4, you have 1 less hour of afternoon time you're budgeting, and you use that for the morning. And so schools will typically open up their school library early in the morning. They work with their community on trying to figure out how to accommodate that rare student that has to be dropped off early. Yes?
But don't you then think it becomes a parenting issue? Because if the day shifts from the school board side, then on the parenting side, they're just going to say the kids could go stay up another hour later. So,
But that's what they should be doing.
But they're not going to be getting that extra hours of sleep that is so important.
Statistically, they actually do, because here's what happens. By being more well rested, they are actually more efficient with their time, and they get more done, and they do it more efficiently. And this is what the football coaches have come back. The football coaches have said, our practices are actually better because our kids are more alert, and we get done more in a shorter amount of time. So by having, the whole thing is by having healthier kids, all of the habits that go along with being healthier are better. Now here's the other interesting thing. It's the biological equivalent of all of us getting up at 4:30. So imagine how you would perform. Now some people like to get up early, but most, we're talking about the average person. Imagine how all of us would perform if 187 days a year you had to get up at 4:30 and perform. You'd be miserable. You'd act like, most people would act like teenagers. And that's what it's about. So we're forcing teenagers to get up at 4:30 in the morning and saying, go be your best. And they're not.
Have any studies been done on service club members that have to get up early?
Well, luckily, even though Rick Dinger's one of the oldest members, he is the biggest teenager in this club. But so that's my passion, because to me it's such a simple fix that has such measurable, oftentimes we say we're going to make a policy today and we're going to see the benefit 10 years from now. I can tell you, my daughter's a sophomore in La Cañada. I can tell you the first week we went to Late Start, she was a happier, nicer kid. An instantaneous change from having that extra hour of sleep. It's amazing. And there's, again, everybody who goes out there and says we should use science to set policy. This is science, backed up by results, backed up by data. Yes, sir.
Talking about science to back it up. Now, us Rotarians think differently. If we made an app for all the teenagers where the speed of the Instagram suddenly slows down at 11 o'clock, it would be the same thing.
We'll do the same thing. But I think it's important for parents to understand that a lot of folks will say, well, it's just a parent should put their kids to bed at 9. That is contrary to the science. There's a reason why if you put your teenager to bed at 9, they fidget until 11. It's their brain chemistry. They can't help it. Now, should you be putting electronic devices in their bedroom? No. You know, they should be charging them in another room. Is there a new study out that says the more kids play on electronic media, the less healthy and happy they are? Yes. So we should be monitoring how much electronic stuff they use. But those are separate issues. Simply based on the brain chemistry and the sleep patterns, we know this works. So anyway, I know this has been something that's being discussed locally. The PTA from Glendale was just up in Sacramento, and the PTA had me talk to the whole state PTA legislative folks on this. The state PTA is supportive of it. Interestingly, the National Education Organization, the parent of CTA, their policy statement is that school start time should be based on science. And the National PTA has adopted the same position. Start time should be based on what science says it should be based on. We have to get the locals to understand that they should do what's in the best interest of kids, not just in the best interest of adults, because after all, it's about the kids. I don't know how much longer I have. Am I good?
2 more minutes.
2 more. Does anybody have a question? Yes.
I gotta ask. And I know you said Southside, they've got their own constitution, the UC and the state schools. But it doesn't make sense to me that as taxpayers, we're funding and they build those schools to help Californians. Yet it's harder for Californians to get in, easier for out-of-state people to get in and pay more money.
Oh, you don't get an argument from me. I mean, the Constitution also guarantees that the top students are guaranteed a spot in a UC. It's a constitutional guarantee. Now, the Constitution doesn't say it's the UC of your choice, but you're guaranteed a spot if you're in the top of your class.
That's why they put a UC in Merced.
Right. By the way, this is funny. I was just talking to some parents of students at Merced, and they're loving it. But that's the constitutional guarantee. Now, here's another challenge, and I challenge all of you who all went to UC. In 1970, you could go to UC San Francisco Medical School for $1,000. UC San Francisco Medical School was built so middle-class students had a world-class medical school, right? You could go to UCLA for $1,000 a semester, right? And the middle class and people who, wanted that world-class public institution to go to had an opportunity to do that. A lot of those folks who went there in 1950 and 1970 and 1980 don't want us to spend as much money on those institutions now. That's not good. It's getting to the point where going to, my daughter went to Santa Barbara. If the UC raises fees again this year, those schools are going to get more and more expensive. So we have to put more money into financial aid. We have to put more money into investing in this generation, frankly, regardless of where they were born, because we need 17,000 doctors just to meet the demands of an aging population. There's 47 allied health professions that have job shortages. It makes no sense to take a bright student and say, we're not going to educate you because you weren't born here. Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm a realtor, and I attended the Glendale City Council meeting this week. They voted on the accessory dwelling unit, and I just would like to share, I don't know where the state came up with that they really have to mandate it just arbitrarily and make the municipalities deal with it, because it's causing a lot of angst.
It is causing a lot of angst. One of the challenges we have, certainly in the foothills, is just the cost of property, the cost of land. And if you go back to I hate to harken back to the day, but there used to be a time where the police officer, the teacher, and the doctor lived on the same street. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen anymore, or it's rarer. So the idea of trying to create housing for people, there were a number of housing packages this year that went through. I voted for most of them. The ones I didn't support were the ones that took too much local control away. So there was one which was just in the paper yesterday. If your city doesn't meet its affordable housing component, people can bypass local control. I just thought that was a little bit too draconian. So I try to find the balance between what makes sense. You know, I'm a former local, council member and mayor, so I try to walk that line. One of my favorite or most interesting bills this year, we do have a drug problem, we have a heroin problem, we have an opioid problem, and there's statistics to say that if you have a supervised hospital setting where people can get, have a safe haven, they'll get into counseling and they'll OD less. That's a good. But there was a bill to say you could put it down the street in the suburbs, and I didn't support that. Put it in a hospital, put it in an outpatient facility, but don't put it in the suburbs. So I try to walk that line of common sense and doing what's right. Last question, because I'm getting the hook from the president.
Thanks for serving representing us in Sacramento. And one of the things that I noticed, I read about is the educational assistance program for the Guard with California National Guard, which is going to be cut in 2018 due to the reasoning was that it was not serving the purpose of retention and for recruitment purposes. So as a service member myself, I would like to advocate for having that, because people like myself volunteer at the time to go and do these activities, and it's an extra benefit for people like us, and it will recruit people. What is one of the reasons why I wanted to sign up as well.
Absolutely. By the way, have you met Yvette from my office?
I have not.
So I have an active reservist on staff. One of my artists contemporary. She went to Chapman and joined the Army while she was at Chapman and graduated. Now she does her one weekend a month serving our country. So no, I'll look into that because I'm the budget chair. Anyway, thank you all.
Great, thank you. Before you step away, I of course wanted to give you a club pin, because good is the new cool. And then you might recognize what's below the Rotary. That of course is the lovely Alex Theater.
That's very cool.
Thank you very much. I wonder who designed that.
I wonder who. I don't want to be partisan, but it's much nicer than the football helmet.
This is also a little thank you gift. Good is the new cool basically talks about how the decisions we make here and now have the snowball effect, repercussions. And so because you are here today talking with us, making a difference, this is actually a gift from a woman around the globe, on the other side of the globe, that is trying to lift her family out of poverty. So she made this, and so you made a difference in her family's life. Thank you.
Thank you. This is